Okay, here we are again, reading another poem. I'm going to do sort of the same thing that I did last time, only since it's a shorter poem, I hope in a shorter way. So once again, with the first time, the first thing I do is I look at the title. Okay? And the title of this poem is The Kiss. Now, this surprises me a little bit. I'm pretending for just a minute that I didn't write the syllabus and I'm just a student who's in the class, right? So the title is a little bit surprising because this is in a unit about war poetry, and I don't have the first beginning of an idea why there'd be something obviously romantic in a war poetry section. So I've already got a puzzle here before I get going at all in the poem, something to pique my interest. Now, I do know a little bit about Sassoon, and I know that he was famous for being a war poet, but that also he wrote poetry before and after the war. And I know a little bit about his attitude toward the war, which is that he didn't like it much. And I know from our unit on Owen that Sassoon had helped Owen to become a more ironic and maybe even cynical or sarcastic kind of poet. He had really turned Owen from a romantic poet in the sense of writing about, love and, flowers and bunny rabbits and stuff, into somebody who was a lot more hard-edged. And so even though I'm a little bit mystified by the title of this poem, I'm also kind of thinking and suspecting that possibly it's ironic, which is probably a good guess. And now with that on board, I can go ahead and read the poem. To these I turn, in these I trust, brother lead and sister steel. To his blind power I make appeal. I guard her beauty clean from rust. He spins and burns and loves the air, and splits a skull to win my praise. But up the noble marching days she glitters naked, cold, and fair. Sweet sister, grant your soldier this, that in good fury he may feel the body where he sets his heel quail from your downward darting kiss. Whoa, boy. I was right to suspect that the name might be ironic, huh? Wow, this is all about war weapons. So let's go on and see what we can do with this poem. Okay, so I can notice some stylistic things about the poem, some formal aspects of the poem first. I notice that there are 1, 2, 3 stanzas of 1, 2, 3, 4 lines each. And so while this isn't a poem that's got a standard name like, the sonnet, which would be a 14-line poem, this is a poem that's very regular. And I can even notice that it's got a rhyme scheme. A, B, B, A. And that holds true all the way through. These rhymes, I also notice these rhymes are perfect rhymes. Trust and rust, steal and appeal. There's nothing tricky going on here formally. Instead, it's a poem that's really doing some standard and even conventional poetic things. So let me go on and think about what else we can see in this poem. I notice that in the first stanza, everything is very, very end-stopped. So we've got a semicolon, we've got a period, we've got another semicolon, and we've got another period. So those are 4 pretty strong end stops. So there's caesuras within this. There's just the one in the very first line. Let me look at the other stanzas of this poem. Here's a comma ending a line, so it's a soft end stop. It's not as hard as a period or a semicolon, but clearly this line is not enjambed. Here's a semicolon, another hard stop. Nothing there. So this is an enjambed line, and another end stop at the end of the stanza. An end stop at the end of the stanza is not a very surprising thing. An enjambment at the end of a stanza would be a very surprising thing. Okay? And caesura is within the line. Nope, 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 and yes, right there. And so what we have is this third line ends up feeling to our ear like a longer line, but up the noble marching days she glitters naked, cold and fair. And so it feels like we've got a really long third line and a really short fourth line because of that enjambment. Let me go on and look at the next stanza. Okay, so end stops first. Here's one, and here's one, but I've got two lines here, two lines in a row that are not end stopped and that are in jammed. And then I've got just this one caesura in the whole thing, and that's right after the address to the sweet sister. So here are a lot of interesting formal things going on within this poem that can help us begin to understand what's happening. I will say, with these two enjambments that we've got here, or these two enjambed lines that we've got at the end, toward the end of the poem, you're going to, as you're reading that, you're going to feel like you've got this sort of, rush. It has to go kind of fast in order for your breath to get it out. It actually creates a physical effect in your body when you read this line out loud. So let me just read this before we move on to the next things that we want to look at. So, that in good fury he may feel the body where he sets his heel quail from your downward darting kiss. Wow. And quail, actually, although it's not the same sound as feel and heel, there's a little bit of slant rhyme going on between those two. And so we really have, we've got something going on here just in terms of what your mouth is doing and what vowels are being used and consonants are being used. That's interesting, that's worth thinking about. All right, so now we can turn and look at the words of the poem. And the first thing I notice is that in the first line we've got a lot of words that start with T. So, of course, there's two, which hardly counts, right? But you've got turn and trust. So, to these I turn, in these I trust. We know that this is a poem that's about someone writing from the I, right? So it's a first-person poem. And there, for some reason, he needs to turn to someone or something for some reason that we don't know yet, and he's asserting that he's turning to something that he can trust. So again, we don't really know what that means yet. It can mean all kinds of things, right? I mean, you might turn to God because you trust God. God is the only thing you can trust. The implication is there's not much that can be trusted right now, and so when you turn to something, and it feels like there's some need here. When you turn to something, you want it to be something that you can trust, and trust is not something that's all that easy to come by. And then going on to the next line, what are they? Brother Lead and Sister Steel. Okay, well, Brother Lead and Sister Steel, they're personifying, and they're giving them these names, which, is my brother, my sister. They're even mildly religious names, right? Like, Brother Francis, right? But instead we've got Brother Lead and Sister Steel. And so this is the point at which we know absolutely that this poem is certainly an ironic poem, and it fits in with the war poetry that we were expecting to find here. So Brother Lead and Sister Steel, what might they be? Okay, it's the bullet and the bayonet, right? By World War I, some officers still had swords, but World War I, not really a sword fight. But they did have bayonets attached to the end of their rifles. And the idea was that in a charge, you would go over the top, and you'd end up in hand-to-hand fighting on the other side, and you'd need your bayonet for that. Now, I will say that here's a little bit of historical background for this poem. The first thing that happened to soldiers in the British Army when they got to France was that they went to a bayonet training camp with this guy who was he was a sergeant major, and he was famous through all the British Army. In fact, you can find lots of diary entries about this guy in all the poets that we've read so far, and in other writers from the war whose works we haven't read any of in this class. He was really, really bloodthirsty, although he never really saw action, and he portrayed the war to them in the same way that the official propaganda did, which is that it was mainly about noble acts in hand-to-hand combat, which obviously, that's not the kind of war that it actually ended up being. So there's a way in which, you go and you see it's almost a spectacle of this guy stabbing bags of hay, and screaming lustily while doing it to get the warrior spirit up in the guys. If any of you watch Blackadder, the very last episode of the fourth series of Blackadder, which is set in World War I, Baldric is talking about his military training, and he actually makes reference to this guy. He talks about their bayonet training and stabbing the bags of straw, and he says, you know, as long as all we're fighting is bags of straw, I'm really well prepared for this war. You know, so I think that that's part of the irony that's going on here. Blackadder obviously being also a really ironic text. So, and you know, what do you do then with Brother Lead and Sister Steel? Well, you do one thing for each of them. For Brother Lead, you make appeal to his blind power, right? And for Sister Steel, you guard her beauty clean from rust. And these are injunctions that are given to the these are injunctions that are given to the soldier, right? That you care for your weapons, and a lot of the time the way that the army does use specifically sexual imagery to talk about this. You know, like it's your girlfriend. The assumption is all soldiers are men, and so like it's your girlfriend. Heterosexual men, I guess I should say too. And so in World War I, this is particularly true, right? They're going to talk about it that way. And you can see that even things like the verb here, that's used to describe what we do with each of these is gendered. So, you know, you guard your girlfriend, you guard your wife, you guard your children, you guard people who are weaker than you are and who need you to protect them. And so here, he's guarding his bayonet. He's guarding it clean from rust. Why is that? In order to keep his weapon clean so that he can use it appropriately when he needs to. On the other hand, with the rifle, with the bullet rather, he makes appeal to his blind power, and so the idea is that the bullet is stronger than he is, right? It's in the superior social position, and so you make appeal to it. You beg it for something. Okay, so moving on to the second stanza. You know, the bullet does, Brother Lead does what bullets do. He spins and he burns, and he loves the air. Now, that's an unusual thing there, right? That's something to pay attention to, because that's not really something that a bullet, well, I suppose it is something that a bullet does, maybe, if bullets can be said to love anything. But it's not a normal way, it's not an ordinary way to describe it. So this is an unusual phrasing here, and therefore always worth paying attention to and thinking about more. What does that mean? What is the point of that? What does it mean to say that a bullet loves the air? Why would he put it that way instead of something else? Right? These are the kinds of things you can tease out if you're writing a developed essay. And of course it does military things, right? Splits the skull to win my praise. So it's killing, and that's what bullets are there for. And then we have this incredibly significant but here, right? So sure, the Brother Lead is pretty cool. It's got blind power. Anybody likes that. Look at the great things it does. It splits a skull. But, and then you get this image that's really kind of an old-fashioned military image, right? We're used to when we think about military poems from before the First World War, they're always about nobility and honor and glory and all this beautiful stuff. And so we have here the noble marching days, but up the noble marching days. Oh, you know, there you go. This is something good, right? This is not brutal and ugly, but it's about nobility and the glory of war. And what is she doing? Right? We know in the next line, what is she doing? She's glittering naked, cold and fair, and so there's obviously some sexual imagery going on in here, right? But it's the sexuality not of the alluring, the voluptuous, the warm and receptive, but rather of the off-putting, the rejecting, the glittering queen, like sort of an ice queen image. And so one of the things that but does is it tells us that he prefers Sister Steel to Brother Lead. Okay? There's something about Sister Steel that's better and nicer than Brother Lead. And what could that thing be? Right? Actually, in a shooting war, Brother Lead is your friend more than Sister Steel is. You don't really want to get close enough to be, you know, stabbing and stabbed back. You know, your most of the fighting is probably going to be happening from a distance, and that it actually is the case in World War I. There's not that much bayoneting going on really in the grand scheme of things, but there's something going on maybe because of the way he's gendered these things, and or maybe because of the one of the things I know about the sergeant major who was leading the training sessions is that he always used really, really sexualized imagery to talk about the bayonet in particular, and to talk about what the bayonet is doing in the body as being like somehow a sex act in order to entice the soldiers who were there to think about this in a really positive way and to look forward to it, as opposed to thinking, I hope I don't ever get to the day when I'm close enough to the enemy soldiers to be stabbing them with my bayonet. So now we hear that this bayonet is a sweet sister. Okay, it's a sweet sister. Now, there's not too much sweet about a bayonet, but nevertheless, he turns to it and he makes this appeal, sweet sister, and then the appeal is specifically to grant him something, grant a wish that he has, and so here with this word and with this invocation, we get the feeling that the bayonet has, the personified bayonet, I suppose I should say, has magical powers of some sort. And this is what he wants. This is what he wants, that in good fury he may feel. So he wants to feel fury. He wants to feel it, and that fury would be good, right? So this is a sort of a heightening of the emotions, a heightening of the sensibility, right, of the soldier. And what does he want to feel? He wants to feel he wants to put his foot on the body of his enemy, and he wants to feel it quail. Quail is a great word, right? Quail means to shrink away from in fear. And so but it's got that, as I said, that resonance with feel and heal that we've just had in these enjambed lines. So he wants to feel in good fury the body that he's stabbing. He wants to feel it quailing from what? Your downward darting kiss. And so there's a way in which what he's doing is, he's doing this kind of violent sexual act to the body that he's stabbing with his bayonet, and it's a violent sexual act. It's a violent sexual act that you have to do in fury. It's not really, in other words, about sexuality at all. Instead, it's about violence and anger, and that's what the bayonet can do. Now, some things to think about, which I will tell you are odd about this poem, is that the sexual act that he's describing here must be it must be, right, a masculine sexual act, because it's penetrative and it's violent, and we usually it's kind of rape-like, and we do associate that with men as male acts rather than female acts, but in this case it's the woman, it's the female, the personified female bayonet, which is the most phallic thing you can think of, right? The bullet isn't, but the bayonet certainly is the most phallic thing you can think of. But that is what is doing all of this attacking. That's what's doing all this violence here. And so we see, looking back over the whole poem, we see a poem that's it's ironic. How is it ironic? It's tricky to know, right? I mean, that's the nature of irony. Does he mean what he says here? Or is he trying to make us think something else about the whole act of being a warrior? I mean, is the reason that he wants so much to use the bayonet that he knows he'll never get the chance to? Is he mocking the sexual imagery that's used by the sergeant major when he's trying to goad the men into feeling warrior-like and to being playing offense as opposed to defense in their war? It's really hard to tell. And there are a couple of different places where Sassoon himself talks about this poem. And in one place, he talks about how impressed he was by that sergeant major who taught them how to use the bayonet. And in the other place, he says everyone was laughing at that sergeant major, that all of us thought it was a big joke, because already we knew before we ever got to the front lines that the things that he was talking about were probably not very realistic representations of the war. Okay, so I hope that was helpful to you in some ways, and we'll see what's coming up next.